We have looked at the Reformation as it happened on the continent of Europe. What we're going to do today is look at what happened to the church as we sort of moved west. And our first stop then would have to be the island of Britannia and what happened there as the Reformation came to Britain. The first thing, the big thing you have to understand, whereas all the Reformations we've looked at so far have been theological, Martin Luther, John Calvin, Zwingli, in England, the Reformation will come for political reasons first, not theological. There's a lot to unpack here. It's a wonderful story. So it'll probably take two videos, ending with the official portrait of Henry VIII. And shameless commercial here. If any of this, all of this really intrigues you, and I hope it will, consider coming with me to London on one of our classes this summer. Because then we take a look at all of these Tudor sites, and I'll take you to all of this stuff up close and personal and get in even more of the nitty-gritty of the story. You can check all of that out in my FAQ page way back in the welcome. Okay, because I do go to London twice each summer with students, just for 2 weeks. Okay, what had happened in England is that the island was being ruled by something called the divine right of kings. So there was somebody on the throne, and there were always people challenging the people on the throne because it was kind of a herd instinct that said, we want the person on the throne that has the most money, men, and morals, and the most power. So that's why people were always challenging the person sitting on the throne, not unlike the elk herd every spring, right? And the people are saying, good, because we want the strongest person leading us. So there's all these wars all the time in England. One of the most famous is called the War of the Roses. There was a ruling house, the Plantagenets, and within the ruling house, there were two families. Think of them as cousins, sort of. The Yorks and the Lancasters. The Yorks symbol was the white rose, and the Lancaster symbol was the red rose. And they were fighting to see if one of their guys could be the next heir to the throne. So the War of the Roses, the Yorks versus the Lancasters. They're going to duke that out for decades. Meanwhile, along the side, there's another aristocratic house, the Tudors. And they say, we have little Henry, and we think Henry has a right to this throne, and we think we can get supporters, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to go hide Henry in France and let him be raised there in safety, while the Yorks and the Lancasters duke it out and lose all their money and lose all their men. And when they're at a weak point, we can bring Henry back and we can defeat him. And that's exactly what they did. The Yorks and the Lancasters are finally to a point where they think they have a soft underbelly, the Tudors do, and they can get him, so they contact Henry in France. People would expect him to cross the English Channel, sail up the Thames, and confront the Plantagenets in London. They said, no, outsmart them. Sail around the island, come in on the beach of Wales, and come into London across the island. They won't see you coming. And that's exactly what Henry does. And it was ingenious because as he's going across the island, all of these peasants and farmers, he would rally them and say, are you guys tired of this endless war that you're paying for to see who can sit in a palace? And they go, yeah, we are. And Henry said, well, come join me. I'm going to defeat him. And so Henry raised up sort of this volunteer army of peasants to get him, okay, as he's crossing the island of Britannia. Meanwhile, however, somebody tipped off Richard III, who's on the throne as a Plantagenet in London. And so he says, well, I'm going to go meet my enemy. And it just so happened that they met almost in the exact center of the island at near a modern-day city that we call Leicester, the Battle of Bosworth. Richard III will go up against Henry VII. They get up early in the morning. Richard III has his devotion book. By the way, we still have it. You'll see it if you come with me to London. And what happened, as the story goes, is there's Henry VII is supposedly the underbelly here. Richard III is way overconfident, And it's a foggy morning, and they're in this marshy part of the island. And the sun breaks forth right over Henry VII. And Richard III sees that and says, I'm going to be the hero. And he charges toward Henry VII alone to be the hero. But his horse gets stuck in the mud and he falls off his horse. Henry VII sees that. And this is this famous line from Shakespeare. Richard III cries out from the ground, right? A horse, my kingdom for a horse. In other words, he can't get away. Henry VII spears him on the battlefield, kills him, takes his crown and places it upon himself. He denudes Richard III, parades him around the battleground on the back of a horse, gives his body to the local monks who go and bury him in an unmarked grave, which was only just discovered a few years ago under a parking lot in Leicester. That's a whole nother story. And Henry VII declares himself the new King of England. He goes into London. He has to do a series of things to establish his right on the throne. He'll come up with the Tudor rose as his symbol. He puts the red and the white rose together, the Yorks and Lancasters. He marries a Yorkist. He will recrown himself in Westminster Abbey. He builds new palaces that are fortified. He mints the first English 20-pound golden coin with his image and the logo on it, sends it all over Europe kind of as a marketing ploy. Everybody now establishes Henry VII Tudor as the next line on the throne. There's only one thing left for Henry to do, and that is to have heirs. So he and his wife have a #1 son, and then they have a #2 son, Henry. And royal couples, as the joke goes, always have an heir and a spare. And they marry off the #1 son then in a political alliance to a princess of Spain, Catherine of Aragon, whose parents are the famous Isabel and Ferdinand, the one who gave Christopher Columbus his ships. Because Spain was wealthy, they had an armada, which is a fancy name for a navy. England didn't have so much, and they were right across the English Channel. So Henry VII said, it'd be really great to have Spain on our side as we build this new dynasty. Well, #1 son married Catherine of Aragon, but then he died before they could have children. And so Henry VII said, I'm sad, so to speak, but at least I have my spare, Henry, the #2 son. And so he said, if Catherine was good enough for my first son, I now want my first son's widow to marry my second son. And so Henry marries his brother's widow. Now Henry VII dies, and Henry VIII comes to the throne with his wife, Catherine. She's from Spain, obviously, devoutly Roman Catholic. The only thing Henry VIII has to do, he's received it all from his dad. His dad did all the fighting. His dad did all the taxation. The dad did all the building of the palaces. Dad gave him the throne. The only thing Henry VIII has to do is have an heir. Catherine will get pregnant. The problem is it's a girl, little Elizabeth. She can't have a son. He needs a son. And Henry VIII one day is reading his Old Testament Bible, and it happens upon this old Levitical law that says, woe to he who marries his dead brother's wife. And Henry VIII said, the Lord is not blessing me with a son because I married my brother's widow. I want this marriage annulled so that I can remarry. Well, when you're the King of England who's married a Roman Catholic Spanish princess, there's only one place to go for an annulment, and that would be the Pope. He sends his leading cardinal, Cardinal Wolsey, to Rome with a letter to the Pope that says the King of England would like an annulment. The Pope has a little bit of problem with this because an annulment in the Roman Catholic Church is a declaration that the marriage never happened. The vows were never consummated. And the Pope says, by the fact that you've had a child, it kind of tells me there was some consummating going on. More importantly to the story is, remember Catherine of Aragon's parents, the King and Queen of Spain, one of the most wealthy dynastic families in the world, devoutly Roman Catholic. Guess who was really heavily funding the papacy in Rome? Of course. They go to the Pope and they said, don't you dare give that little snot of a son-in-law of ours a divorce. Our daughter is a princess. She's not a divorcee. And so the Pope denies Henry VIII's request for an annulment. Cardinal Wolsey has to come home with that news. He's so horrified at the king's reaction, he gives him his country palace, Hampton Court Estate. Henry VIII is furious, but he outfoxes them all. He says, well, this is what I'll do then. I declare that the church in England, by my act of supremacy, 1534, says that in England, the church here is no longer ruled by the Pope. It is overseen by the King of England. So he became head of the Church of England, and that done, he gave himself a divorce. Catherine and Elizabeth are sent to a nunnery in the countryside. Henry VIII remarries wife number 2, Anne Boleyn. Good news, bad news. Good news, Anne Boleyn gets pregnant. Bad news, it's a girl, Elizabeth. Oh, you know what? I misspoke. The first the child that Henry VIII had with Catherine of Aragon was Mary. Elizabeth now will be child number 2, a girl with Anne Boleyn. She can't get pregnant again. She's not getting pregnant again. At least not with a boy. Henry VIII says, well, now what do I do? I'm getting older. All I have to do is have a son. He trumps up charges against Anne Boleyn that she's committed treason because she was a witch and flirting with guys in the court, puts her on trial, finds her guilty, orders her executed. So Henry VIII orders his second wife to be executed on Tower Hill. I don't think there was a whole lot of love lost because he was back at Hampton Court Palace at the time of the execution, playing tennis. And what he said to the executioner is when the deed is done, fire off a cannon in London. And then about 5 miles down the River Thames, when you hear that cannon shot, you fire off your cannon. And they had this chain reaction of cannon fires until 11 miles down the Thames at Hampton Court Palace, Henry VIII heard the fire, the cannon fire, and said, oh, my wife is done. I'm now free to remarry. He left the tennis game, went into the chapel, and filed banns to marry his third wife, Jane Seymour. Good news, bad news. Good news, Jane Seymour gets pregnant and has a boy, Edward. Bad news, she dies in childbirth. So Henry's a widower again. For the sake of this lecture, you need to know that Henry will marry 3 more times. We're not going to go into that because he will not have any more children. So he has 6 wives, and the quick way to remember this, it's in your handout, is divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. The 6 wives of Henry VIII and 3 children. Before we go on to the children, what happened to Henry VIII? He has a jousting accident. So he can't exercise anymore, but he keeps up his daily diet. He becomes a huge man, as you'll see in his portrait. The story is that he became so large that at his funeral, which by tradition, all sovereigns are buried in 3 caskets, one of lead, one of tin, one of wood, or something like that. They did such a good job of sealing him up, but he was so large and so much post-mortem gases that Henry VIII literally blew the lid off his casket during his funeral. And the diarists even said that dogs were licking up parts of his flesh. So from there on out, from Henry VIII on, sovereigns are still buried in 3 caskets, but now they drill holes underneath, so that embarrassing thing will never happen. Henry VIII asked to be buried by his true wife, Jane Seymour, the only one who gave him a son, at Windsor Castle in St. George's Chapel. Okay, Henry VIII is gone. That leaves 3 children. Girl number 1, Mary. Girl number 2, Elizabeth. Youngest son, Edward. Who will come to the throne? Of course, the boy, Edward. But he's too young to rule. So he's given a regent. The regent happens to be someone who's very sympathetic to Protestantism. And so even though the Church of England initially said we're the Roman Catholic Church, the only difference is that on the island of Britannia, we're ruled not by the Pope, but by the King. What Edward's regent did is turn everything in a Protestant, Calvinist, we might say Puritan direction. All out Protestantism now for theological reasons. But Edward dies before he can marry, before he can have kids. So that leaves 2 tutors left, Mary and Elizabeth. Well, in that scenario, the oldest girl, Mary, will come to the throne, and England has her first queen, Mary, who's called back from the nunnery where she's been raised by her devout Roman Catholic mother. She sees what her half-brother Edward has done to the Roman Catholic Church. She revokes the Act of Supremacy. She rounds up Protestant literature and minister, burns some of them at the stake, giving her the nickname Bloody Mary, and takes all of England back to Roman Catholicism. She marries a Spanish prince, Prince Philip, who, upon meeting her, says that Queen Mary is as ugly as a cow of Flanders, and she has the worst case of halitosis I've ever seen. That is bad breath. But anyway, the marriage happens. Mary claims that she's pregnant, and Prince Philip is kind of surprised. He says, I don't know how that happened, but she insists, and there's a bump in her stomach that's developing. But it turns out the bump on her stomach really was a cancerous tumor. And Mary dies before having children. And as for Prince Philip, he can't get back on the first ship back to Spain fast enough. That leaves the last Tudor heir, Elizabeth. Elizabeth will come to the throne, and she says, my people, enough of this marriage drama. I pledge to you to be your virgin queen. I am married to you. And she kept her promise, the virgin queen, Elizabeth. And she says, as to the religion problem, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to reinstate the Act of Supremacy so that I can be in charge and clean up this mess. So she does. And now that she's in charge of the Church of England, she says we're going to follow a Via Media principle. Via Media, via the middle road. We're not going to be fully Protestant nor fully Catholic. Everybody will be equally unhappy. For example, she'll say in the Church of England, we're going to have priests. We're going to call our leaders priests. And all the Catholics are going, yep, we knew it all along. People running the church should be called priests. Comma, but our priests may marry. And all the Protestants said, see, we were right on that one. Nobody's happy. Priests who can marry. See, the middle road. She'll say we're going to follow a common liturgy, just like the Roman Catholic Church, the Missal, the Book of Common Prayer. And all the Protestants, Catholics say, great, we love a common liturgy, comma, but it will be in English, not in liturgical Latin. And so it goes, the 39 articles of the Church of England by Elizabeth I, a via media, a middle way, so that nobody is fully happy. She follows the hierarchical system of the Roman Catholic Church of having priests, bishops, archbishops, but then comma, but the highest rank in here will be the archbishop. So there's no cardinals or popes. 39 times. You can look this up if you want to. The Church of England then still exists that way. The sovereign is still in charge. It's when the Church of England came to the New World to distinguish the Church of England there from the Church of England here, we call it the Episcopal Church. And if you do your church visit or go to an Episcopal church on a Sunday morning, in the prayers, you'll hear the priest pray for your servant, Our Lady Elizabeth, meaning the Queen of England. And you're praying for it in the United States. That's why. Elizabeth will die without children, so the Tudors will come to an end. Henry VII, Henry VIII, Edward, Mary, Elizabeth. And so what Elizabeth will do in her plan for succession is she reaches for a cousin, James Stuart of Scotland. She dies, he will come to the throne, and James Stuart will affirm the Church of England, and he'll say, we just need one more thing. We need a new translation of the Bible in English. You may have heard of that then as the King James Bible of James Stuart. And that goes all the way back to that lecture, up many modules. That's all I want to say right now about the Church of England and Henry VIII, because we're at about the 20-minute mark, but I am going to have a little addendum. Make sure a picture is worth 1,000 words. So we're going to look at Henry VIII's portrait and what it tells us about him and his mission. But I hope you've enjoyed this just tantalizing introduction to the Church of England. And again, come with me to London. We'll show you all of these sites and more. Thanks. Bye.